Head, our military analyst, retired U.S. Air Force General Buster Clausen. General, give us an analysis of what the NATO forces have done so far and what they will be trying to do in the days immediately ahead.
Well, Dan, they've primarily focused on the air defenses and the factories that build military equipment, and they will continue to do that to a certain extent in the supply depots. However, the Serb army, as you said, and security forces continue to burn villages and kill ethnic Albanians. So I'm quite sure that you'll see us bombing more barracks today than you did yesterday. You'll also see us taking out some of the supply line bridges, railroad bridges and road bridges to isolate Kosovo, so we then can very systematically destroy that land force tank by tank or barrack by barrack if necessary. But one of the biggest problems they're going to be facing, Dan, in the near future is not Milosevic, but the weather. The front that is currently over Italy is going to move over the Adriatic, cover Kosovo in clouds and snow, starting Saturday for about 2 or 3 days. So our will be tested, but there will not be any impact to the eventual outcome if we just remain patient. We will provide that knockout blow to that Serbian force.
General, thank you.
Were rounded up by Belgrade police and taken to the station. After nearly 4 hours, they were released, but it basically set into motion an order to leave the country. Within 24 hours, journalists were packing their equipment and getting ready to leave Yugoslavia. Police made several visits to the hotel, confiscating equipment and encouraging everyone it was time to pull out. Late in the afternoon, it was official. The government said all international journalists from countries where NATO was based would be asked to leave. The trip to the border was a nervous ride. The second night's airstrikes were scheduled to start within 15 minutes. There have now been 2 strikes over Yugoslavia, from the northern tip to the southern area near Kosovo, hitting military targets the first time around, at least 40 different locations, including airports, barracks, ammunition dumps, supply centers. Just how many more days and nights of bombing it will take in Yugoslavia is an open question. Tom Intier, CNN, on the Croatia-Yugoslavia border.
Of a lot of villages and rounding up prominent civilians, taking advantage of the absence of international observers.
The situation that I'm hearing about in Kosovo, at least, is really quite grim. I'm very worried about it.
In Pristina, Veton Soroy, one of the 4 Kosovar signers of the Rambouillet Accords, has gone into hiding, say humanitarian groups, after his newspaper offices were destroyed and the doorman killed. And the headquarters of the party of leading Kosovar moderate Ibrahim Rugova was burned to the ground, eyewitnesses say. Also in Pristina, a human rights lawyer, Bahram Kelmendi, was abducted during the night along with his 2 teenage sons by Serbian paramilitary gunmen, according to Human Rights Watch. In the town of Đakovica, a prominent doctor, Izzet Hima, has also been abducted, according to humanitarian officials. And in the small town of Obranca, 10 men were executed, according to Rugova party officials.
The war in Kosovo has now entered a new phase. Serbian forces have begun to abduct and execute the professionals, intellectuals, political leaders, and others in a number of places throughout Kosovo.
As darkness fell on Yugoslavia, so did more than 20 cruise missiles launched from U.S. warships. America's most accurate weaponry has been taking a toll on military buildings and equipment across Yugoslavia. But NATO still has to soften up air defenses before it can make headway in its ultimate goal, stopping the Yugoslav army in its tracks.
What we are doing is targeting his integrated air defenses and to take those down so that our aircraft can go in greater numbers with other types of munitions and start to go after those military targets that allow him to wage this kind of assault against the Kosovar Albanians.
So far, NATO airstrikes have concentrated primarily on air defenses, including airports where some of the Yugoslav Air Force has been destroyed on the ground. But increasingly, the Pentagon says future targets will be military bases and the troops they support.
As airstrikes continue, you could expect that there would be a focus on achieving a more aggressive focus on achieving our goal.
Sources say 2 B-2 stealth bombers were again used Thursday night because of their effectiveness in their combat debut on night 1. In fact, sources say more B-2s may be added to the mix if, as expected, the weather worsens over the next few days because of the radar-evading planes' ability to drop bombs which are unaffected by cloud cover because of their satellite guidance.
President Milosevic and his military leaders should understand that there is no sanctuary for them, their military forces, their command and control elements as this campaign continues.
After 2 nights of bombing, Yugoslav forces have offered only token resistance, firing ineffective anti-aircraft guns at the attacking NATO planes, but not launching any dangerous surface-to-air missiles. It could be the airstrikes have blinded parts of the system, or that the Yugoslavs are holding their fire in hopes of luring Allied planes into a trap. And since US F-15s in a Dutch F
stage is the way one military officer put it, a reference to the next phase, hitting troops and...
Officers have not allowed interviews with pilots at the airbase, but as the aircraft which flew the initial missions were being readied for another attack, reporters were permitted to talk to a specially selected group of the ground support personnel who are keeping the planes flying. It is, they all agreed, not much different than what they'd been trained for, not the work anyway. But all felt moods change as routine operations shifted to real conflict.
The sight here was awesome. Jet after jet taking off. Just knowing that all those jets are going up to do something, it's pretty exciting.
It was the period between the time the planes took off and the time that they returned, which several said was the most tense.
Our prayers are with them. We have every confidence that at every layer, every person that's touched that jet has done his or her best to do what needs to be done. But anytime one of our people goes in harm's way, there is some nervousness.
But handling the sophisticated weaponry meant to destroy brings about its own concerns. Some reflect upon their jobs in terms of the good NATO believes it is trying to do.
Overall, we are helping people, so I think it's a good thing.
But for one of those charged with actually loading the bombs on the planes, the initial attack was a time to pray.
Yes, sir, I did. I prayed for the pilots and the Kosovars and the Albanians. I mean, I wish that they could reach an agreement without any destruction whatsoever.
Still, more destruction is in the offing. For those on the ground, this new mission may soon itself become routine.
And the support personnel tell us that, at least from a maintenance standpoint, there's no reason why these operations can't continue indefinitely. Colleen?
It is that the B-52s here have just started taxiing. If I just move out of the way, perhaps you can see one of those planes behind me. 2 of them have already headed off down to the end of the runway to get in their position for launch. We can see just behind some of those buildings now a 3rd one moving off, and behind that I can see a 4th one. So it looks as if most of this squadron is on the move. One of the planes actually behind me here has had one of the engines removed, one of its 8 Pratt & Whitney engines. So I imagine that one may be staying on the ground, but the others are certainly on the move.
Andrew, the first indication we have that airstrikes were happening at all in this conflict was the takeoff of these huge aircraft. What is the timescale? How long does it take to get there?
Well, you're right, yes. The first indication of an airstrike was here at RAF Airfield on Wednesday, when at about a similar time the planes took off. Perhaps they're moving off just a little earlier today. If they fly directly towards Serbia and Kosovo, they could reach there in 2 or 3 hours. Certainly what happened last time is that they took a much more indirect route. We don't quite know what that route was, but they flew for several hours, for 5 or 6 hours, before launching their missiles from a range of several hundred miles, and they launched those missiles from somewhere over the Mediterranean. So it could be that they take off now, fly around, and then launch their missiles later on this afternoon so that they will hit at about dusk.
And obviously those on the ground are going to be assessing the damage caused in the more recent raids.
That's right. Presumably by now the pilots who are on board the planes today will have had some indication of how those initial launches went. I've spoken to a US journalist, a newspaper journalist, who was on those planes when they went on the raid, and he said how his plane launched 5 missiles on that day. We saw the cruise missiles being loaded onto these planes yesterday. They're called Calcum, conventional air-launched cruise missiles. Each one of these planes, we believe, is carrying 8 of those missiles internally in their bomb bay, and these missiles have a range of some 600 miles.
Andrew, I mean, we've been seeing pictures of these things, but unless you're actually standing up to next to one of them, you can't appreciate the sheer size of them, can you?
Yes, these planes are enormous beasts with their 8 engines. They're very old planes as well. These planes are nearly 40 years old. They were first used in anger in the Vietnam War when they carpet bombed some of the sites there. But though the airframe is very old, the technology they're carrying is very modern. We saw some pictures from the inside the cockpits the other day, and you could see the control stick. The metal had actually been worn away with so many pilots' hands. So a very old plane, but updated continually.
Andrew, the fact of this is that they are effectively at war. They are on a mission to destroy and perhaps to kill. The RAF, we know, has psychiatrists and people to deal with pilots and those involved. Does the US Air Force have a similar arrangement?
I would imagine they do. We were speaking to some of the pilots yesterday, and of course this was the question we were asking them. How do you feel knowing that the missiles you carry deliver death and destruction at the other end? And what they said is that they try to avoid thinking of the consequences. They're there to do a job, they do it to the best of their ability, and they try not to think of the consequences. But if you press them on that, some of them will say, well, we hope that what we're doing will help end the crisis in Kosovo, that perhaps there will be some collateral damage, as they call it, some civilian casualties, but perhaps that will stop a greater tragedy happening in Kosovo.
The sound and the power of them, it really brings it home the sort of craft it is. Tell us about how it will be used. Where will they be heading? Do we have any idea?
Well, I should imagine they'll go out now out of the commercial airline routes around the United Kingdom, out over the Atlantic, form up, take some fuel on board. It takes quite a lot of fuel to get them off the ground. You can see the amount of exhaust coming out from those 8 Pratt & Whitney engines there. Then they will be taking on board fuel, and then we'll see them, they'll go off to somewhere over the Mediterranean, I would guess.
His mood was fairly sombre, but obviously there was an adrenaline rush. He was confident that they had produced the results that were required, and very positive about the night's events.
The impact of the NATO attack was clear on the ground. Although these pictures are from an unknown location in Serbia, the effects appeared fairly extensive.
The naval forces were once again involved in airstrikes against military targets in Yugoslavia. 6 Royal Air Force Harriers attacked explosive ammunition storage buildings within a military barracks at Leskovac, shown on the map. The targeted barracks was home to an anti-aircraft unit and an infantry unit. Weapons and equipment stored included anti-aircraft guns and ammunition, man-portable surface-to-air missiles, target tracking radars, and large-caliber self-propelled and towed guns. Such weapons and ammunition are used for point air defense and offensive ground operations and are therefore relevant both to our objective of suppressing the Yugoslavian air defense system and to our aim of reducing Yugoslavia's capability to repress the Kosovars. All of our aircraft returned safely to their bases, having completed their missions. Of the 3 targets that they attacked, 2 were successfully destroyed, as you'll see in a minute from the video camera footage. 1 aircraft successfully locked onto the 3rd target, but as a result of a technical problem, the aircraft didn't release its bombs. Our aircraft were not attacked by missiles or anti-aircraft fire. Group Captain Parkinson will now take you through the video.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to show you 2 clips of our films last night. Both attacks were against the same target area, but the pilots have been allocated different impact points inside that target complex, and you'll see that on the films. The Harriers last night flew what we call a cooperative attack, with 1 pilot in 1 aircraft designating the target with his laser pod, and the other pilot in his aircraft providing the weapons to attack the target. It may look like a fairly simple procedure when you watch this film, but I should remind you that the Harrier pilot is in an extremely complex environment when he's carrying out this attack. He's required to fly in formation with the other aircraft. He's required to look out for attacks from the air. He's required to look at the ground for signs of launch of surface-to-air missiles. But most importantly, he's required to monitor his airborne electronic warfare warning equipment, which will continuously alert him if he is attacked. Could we show the first film, please? This is the picture the pilot would see when he first selects weapon aiming. He's still several minutes out from weapons release at this stage, and his responsibility is to identify the target area. He's still too far out to identify his actual aiming point, and he'll do that later on. You'll see at the top of the film, running down from the top right-hand corner, that's a ribbon conurbation of the town of Leprovac. Below that, the C-shaped area, just above the center of the picture, that's a wooded area closely associated with the target area. And inside that wooded area, inside that C-shape, is the rest of the military complex. The pilot at this stage will be monitoring his warning equipment. We've just moved in a few miles now, and the pilot's beginning to break out his own target, and you can see to the top left-hand corner the rest of the military complex. Again, the C-shaped wood is dominant there, and the pilot will be using all these features so that he can identify the target. We're moving further in now, and I hope you can see there are a line of buildings running from top left to bottom right. The two buildings on the right are slightly smaller. They are not targets for this attack, and the pilot is now marking in the center of the target the correct response. You'll see other buildings down to the bottom left. The aircraft's picture has moved through 90 degrees now. This is because this pilot is not flying directly towards the target because he's not launching weapons at it, and he's making a small evasive maneuver at this stage. But the pod continues to track the target. And you'll see shortly the impact. Secondary explosion with the weapons inside the storage area now exploding. We'll just move on shortly to the second attack. You just hold the film there, please. We'll just move on shortly to the second attack. This is, again, another one of those bunkers in that line that you saw. And the pilot, during this attack, while he's preparing to make the attack, believes he may be engaged by an enemy radar and consequently takes evasive maneuvering to be on the safe side. And you'll see that later on he does have sufficient time so he can safely acquire the target before the weapons are released. Can you play the film, please? On the right-hand side, top right-hand side, the dark patch there, that indicates where the first bomb went off. And you can see the line of buildings there, and the pilot's trying to select his aiming point at this stage. Top left, you can see the rest of the complex. Film's running now. This is where he has to maneuver his aeroplane because he believes he may be attacked. He comes out of that maneuver, the equipment quickly locates the exact area, and the pilot refines the mark in plenty of time to safely execute the attack. Here again, we have the final phase of the marking. See the shape of the road. All that is helping the pilot accurately identify his aiming point. Weapon impact there, bit of smoke at the bottom of the picture. That's from the first, from his leader's bombs. You can see the effect of the detonation there. And surely those weapons inside those storage areas will now have been destroyed. Thank you.